Ray Poynter here, and here are my 7 tips for asking better questions. And here's the agenda. I'm first of all going to talk about the tension and the trade-off potentially between the human experience of the participant taking part and the need to construct a research instrument. Then I'm going to go through the 7 tips. I'm going to highlight a whole bunch of other things. I'm not going to go into the other thoughts, but there are many more than 7 ways that you can improve the sort of questions you ask in surveys and questionnaires. And then we'll take Q&A. So this is this contrast, this tension between the human experience and the research instrument. We want the people who take our surveys, who fill in the questionnaires, to be willing to complete them. So we want to make them engaging. We want to hold people's attention so that we get good quality information. And we want to leave people happy enough that they will do further projects with us. Otherwise, we will end up with fewer and fewer people, i.e. the participant crisis. So all of those would lead us towards making it more engaging, more personalised, more individual. But at the same time, it is a research instrument. There is no point doing the exercise if we can't work out what it means. And that tends to mean that we need to collect information that's consistent when it should be consistent. So consistent between people. If I am angry and you are angry, we want the data to show us both being angry. We don't want the scales to be misleading or the wording to be misleading, so we tend to answer in different ways. And we want it to be consistent with an individual. If I am asked the same question 1 month and then 3 months later, and if my views have not changed, we don't want my numbers to have changed either. But the instrument should also identify differences where relevant differences exist. So differences between people. If I do have a different view than you, then the research instrument should highlight that. And if I do another interview in 3 months about my satisfaction with the service and my satisfaction has changed, then we want the instrument to highlight that there is a different score. So we need this consistency of the research instrument, we need the sensitivity of the research instrument, and we need the experience to be right. There is no point having one of these without the other. So that is one of the tensions that we have to work with. So the first tip, create a narrative flow. If we think about a meal, they have a narrative flow. You wouldn't want to start with the rice pudding. When we think about a theatre production, there is a flow. The scene is set, something happens, we move on to the denouement near the end. Your questionnaire should have a narrative flow. It should feel like it makes sense. It should not jump all over the place, and worse still, it shouldn't loop back on the participants. So they're wondering, haven't I already asked that question? So when you're arranging it, try to make it make sense in terms of the flow. There are 4 basic rules of questions, and this is a single tip, but you should make sure that you always do these. Can people understand what the question is asking? So, would you describe your condition as acute or chronic? Turns out an enormous percentage of the population do not know the difference between acute or chronic. They will often assume that serious means acute, as opposed to occasional and chronic being ongoing. So those aren't great terms if we're talking to the general public. If, on the other hand, we're talking to somebody who knows they've got a chronic condition, or we're talking to medically trained professionals, well, that's fine. So the wording of the questions needs to be such that people know what we're asking. People should also need to know what the answer is. Questions like, how fast is your internet connection at home in megabits per second? People might have been aware of it occasionally, perhaps when they took out a contract, but it's not something that they would know on a regular basis. If we ask people how much they spent on coffee last year, they'll often give us an answer, but unless the answer is 0, it's unlikely to be in a particularly informed view. So we need to ask questions where people do know what the answer is. We need to ask questions where people are willing to answer the question. So, do you overclaim your expenses at work is something that many people would not answer truthfully if they didn't claim their expenses at work, particularly if this was an employee satisfaction, employee experience survey. And finally, you need to be able to interpret the answers that people give you. Was the train clean and punctual? That's a really easy question to understand. People know what the answer is and they're willing to answer it. But if they say no, was the train dirty but punctual? Was the train late but clean? Or was it both unclean and late? We don't know. We can't interpret the answer correctly. So that's why double-barreled questions are bad news, because we can't interpret the answer. Social desirability bias is what we're talking about in C of those. Are people likely to tell us the truth? So these are the basic rules for all questions. So this is a hat tip here to Reg Baker, who was the first person I saw make the jump from Norman doors to Norman questions. So Norman door is a feature. It's named after the expert in design. And sometimes you come to a door and people have to put a sign on it to say pull, not push, because things have an intuitive way of being done. So a Norman door is a door where the intuition is wrong. You want to pull it when you should be pushing. You want to push it when you should be pulling it. We get the same problems with questions. If your question is not intuitive, people will often jump to the intuitive solution. The real giveaway is if you've got a large amount of text. The more text you have, the more likely it is that you have a non-intuitive question. So if we look at this question I've sort of hypothesized here, if price was not an issue, and if all of these options were equally available to you, and you were going to switch to a new energy provider next year, which would you pick? And I've come up with some nonsensical names there. What you will find is that very often people will shorten that long question to, which of these would you pick? Ignoring that I've taken price and availability out of the picture. So what people are answering is not what I think I'm asking. In general, long text, long questions means a bad question. You should always make sure that everybody who is going to see a question has an answer that they can pick. The top one on the left there is fairly obvious. Which is your favourite? Chicken, beef, pork? Well, the vegans and the vegetarians are really going to struggle with that question. Next question down, which state do you live in? This is a question I get asked frequently when I'm buying things or doing things online, from Alabama through to Wyoming. It needs to have an option for people who are not in the USA. Even for people in the USA, it needs an option for people who are in places like Washington, D.C. So what can we do? First of all, we can add an appropriate option. Maybe it's none, maybe it's other. Maybe it's other, please specify, don't know, not applicable. Or we maybe filter the question so that only people who live in the United States are asked questions about where in the United States they live. Maybe we filter the question so only people who sometimes eat chicken or beef or pork are asked which of those is their favourite. We need to make sure there is always an answer for everybody. So a bit of gratuitous self-promotion here from a book I wrote with Naveen Williams and Sue York a few years ago. Design your surveys to be mobile first. You're going to find that people will do them on mobile and on tablet and on computer. But design them for mobile. Are the questions and answers visible? Because this is one of the issues about putting it on mobile. They don't all fit on the screen and you have to have two-dimensional scrolling or super tiny fonts. Then make sure that it renders okay, that it looks all right on computers and tablets. Start with the mobile, move to the tablets and the computers. Also consider, can a typical user manipulate the screen to answer the question? So one of my pet hates when I'm doing a survey on a mobile phone is when people put a ranked list there and they say, please drag the options into order. So here it might be from first to seventh, and I've got to drag Coke and Diet Coke and Pepsi Max and Fanta. And you know what? I find that, and a lot of other people find that, really hard on a mobile screen to be dragging options up and down a list. It's not so bad if you've got 2 or 3. Once you get 5, 6, 7, or even I've seen them with 10 or 12, it doesn't really work on the mobile screen. You will get data, because what will tend to happen is people will move 1 or 2 things to the top, the ones they really like, but the rest of the ordering is not great. My preferred last question, and I ask it on almost every survey I've run for the last 20, 30 years, is there anything else you'd like to tell us about this topic or this survey? And it's an open-ended question. And so many times this question has saved my bacon, because it's turned out that I've asked something wrongly, I've missed something out, and people will put that comment in there. Or there is another topic that people want to talk to us about and they've felt ignored if this question wasn't there. Now, this isn't a really super typical way of asking an open end, because I've got another option in there. So one is a closed option where you can click no, I don't have anything else to say, or type something in. And that just makes the option a little bit friendlier. I like this as a format for asking open-ended questions quite a lot. If I'm saying to people, you don't have to answer this open-ended question, then give them a specific option rather than encouraging them just to leave the box blank. The next thing we need to consider in terms of the tips is testing and monitoring. You should do more of this than most of us do at the moment. The first thing is that you and the end client should always take the survey on your mobile phones. Does it look and feel right? Don't do the job quickly yourself on your computer. Don't let your end client, your stakeholder, go do this survey. You need to see what it looks like, how it feels when you do it on your mobile. Get a printout of the questionnaire, and it's one of the very few times that I would recommend a printout versus a digital. You can do it digitally, but a printout is great. And then go through the survey repeatedly, putting a highlighter through the printed copy when you've seen every question. This is going to tell you that everything does come up and it looks right. Many of the platforms now have a random response generator, and that's a great tool for running through to see that the questionnaire is robust, it's not going to fall over, it's going to get data in all of the fields that you expect to see data in. And then the soft launch. Before you send out all the invitations, try to get 30, 40, 50, 100 completed surveys. Depending, of course, on what the sample size. If you're only trying to get 100, you're probably going to have to do a soft launch with 5 completes. But if you're trying to get 1,000, then certainly a soft launch with 50 to 100 makes sense. Check what people are typing into that last open-ended question. Are you getting too many people saying don't know, not applicable? Or are you getting some strange responses that you weren't expecting? Have a look and see how long it took people to take the survey. Does it match what you have said in the invitation the survey will take? and then monitor during the fieldwork, looking at exactly the same sorts of issues that you check during the soft launch, because you might find that some different problems start to appear and then you'll need to deal with them. So those are my 7 tips, but there are lots of other things that you might want to go away and research in addition. The first one is mostly you should not be creating new scales. If you've got a lot of experience, if you've got perhaps a postgraduate qualification in research design, then maybe you will from time to time be writing new questions. But most questions we need to ask are already out there. They have been tested. They have been validated. Use those questions. You're going to modify the topic slightly. You're going to modify the brands or the attributes they refer to. But that's the way to go for most people. Actually, that's the way to go for everybody most of the time, and for most people all of the time. Put in some quality measures, sometimes we call these traps, so that you know that people are engaged, they're trying to answer the questions properly. The sort of things you might do is you might include in a list of places that people have been to recently a brand that closed down 2 years ago, because nobody should be picking that brand. You might put in questions like, on the following question, on the question below, for quality control purposes, please select option 4. And then you would have 4 options down there. And that is telling you again whether people are reading it and whether it's a human that's reading it and not a bot. Asking people's year of birth at one part of the survey, and then which age category do you fall into in another part, can also be one of these consistency and quality checks. Think about system 1 and system 2. Are you trying to get people's top of mind thoughts? Are you trying to get their rational answers? So if I'm telling you how many times I go to town, and do I use the bus or do I use the car? Is anybody else in the vehicle? That's very much the rational part. So we're going to organise the survey around rational thinking. If I'm trying to work out whether this new advertising has an emotional impact on you, I am not going to ask closed questions saying on a 1 to 7 scale, how excited does this make? We are going to have to look at some of the other techniques to do with images, to do with implicit association, something else in addition. So think about what type of data you're collecting. Cognitive load, don't make it too hard. Most people don't do very well if you're asking them to do arithmetic. If you're asking them what their average spend is, you're kind of asking them to add stuff up and divide it by the number of times. That's often too much. You might want to look at using games and gamification, and I strongly recommend Betty Adamu's book on this topic. Can you do that in a way that's going to give you better data? You should always be thinking about adaptive scripting. Adaptive scripting at its simplest is simply filtering. Here is a range of brands. Which have you heard of? Of the ones you've heard of, which have you ever used? Of the ones you've used, which do you use most often? But adaptive scripting can be a lot more than that. It can be making the participant feel like the survey is really following them through their life and is being personalised. One of the extreme examples of adaptive scripting, of course, is chat and conversational approaches. This might be right for you. Runs the risk of not producing a good research instrument, so be careful. Look at the literature, do some testing. And finally, voice, actually not finally, next to last, penultimate, voice. Do you want to enable people to talk into their device to give you answers? That is a growing area of interest. And then you can perhaps measure the stress and how the voices sound too. And the final 2, showing and uploading video. So increasingly by showing videos as part of the data collection, we might want people to upload it. This is going to be more qualitative information unless you get them then to code their own uploaded information. And we're moving into a world where more and more virtual reality is possible. It's been around for over 25 years. It's got some problems to do with how long it takes to set it up, but it does open up some interesting opportunities. So here are an additional 10 things to explore. I covered 7 tips. Those I think are essential all the time. But likewise, think about these 10 other areas. You're on a journey to get better and better at asking questions, and what better questions means will change over time as well. So thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to questions.